My son leaned across the polished table toward the lawyer, lowered his voice the way people do in front of someone they think cannot follow along, and said, "Don't worry about her. She doesn't know what she's signing." But I did. I knew exactly what I was signing. I knew exactly what that thick stack of papers was meant to do. And I knew exactly what my son and his wife had spent 3 months planning. I sat in that leather chair with my purse in my lap and my reading glasses perched on the end of my nose, and I let my hand tremble a little as I picked up the pen, because that is what they expected to see. A confused old woman. A signature waiting to happen. What Greg did not know as he whispered to that lawyer about his poor fading mother was that I had taught high school mathematics for 38 years. I had watched 10,000 teenagers try to slide something past me. I knew the look of a person who believes he is smarter than you. My son had that look. He had had it since he was 16. And what he really did not know, the thing that would have made the pen fall right out of his hand, was that everything in that stack of papers was already too late. Months too late. While he sat there congratulating himself on how easy this was going to be, I had already been 3 steps ahead of him every single day, for a long while. And there was a man sitting 2 floors down in that very building, waiting for my phone call, who was about to walk into that room and change my son's entire life. But I am ahead of myself. Let me set the pen down for a moment and go back to the beginning, so you understand how a retired math teacher ended up across a table from her own son while he tried to take everything she had. My name is Margaret Donnelly. I am 71 years old. And I am going to tell you how my boy learned, far too late, that his mother could still do the math. For 38 years, I stood at a chalkboard, and later a whiteboard in room 214 of Lincoln High School, and I taught algebra and geometry, and, in my last 15 years, calculus. I was not a famous teacher. I never won any awards. But I was the one who stayed after the bell for the kids who did not get it the first time, or the second time, or the third. I believed that anyone could understand numbers if someone was patient enough to show them. I was patient. Patience, it turns out, is a kind of power. People mistake it for weakness right up until the moment it costs them everything. I married Ray Donnelly when I was 24. Ray was an electrician, a big, gentle man with burns on his forearms and a laugh you could hear clear across a parking lot. He ran his own little business out of a van for 40 years. He could fix anything that carried a current, and he could not, to save his life, balance a checkbook. That was my department. Ray used to say the 2 of us were a perfect circuit. He made the power, and I made sure none of it leaked out. We were not poor, but no one looking at us would have called us rich. We lived in the same 3-bedroom ranch house on Maple Street for 41 years. I drove a Buick until the doors nearly fell off. We ate at home. We had our coffee, Maxwell House, on the back step every morning before work. To anyone watching, we were exactly what we appeared to be. A teacher and an electrician, getting by. But here is something I never told my son, and I want to tell you because it matters for everything that comes after. I understood compound interest. I taught it every single year. And I will tell you, there is nothing in this world that separates the people who teach a thing from the people who actually do it, quite like watching a math teacher reach retirement with money in the bank. Every year for 38 years, I put part of my salary away. Every raise I got, I saved half. Ray and I bought 2 rundown duplexes that nobody else wanted. And he rewired them with his own hands on the weekends, and we rented them out, and we put the rent right back into more. Quiet money, patient money, the kind that does not show. Nobody knew. That was the whole point. We did not want people treating us differently. We did not want to become a bank to every relative with a story. So we lived small and let the numbers grow in the dark, the way numbers do, slowly and then quickly, year after year, until one ordinary Tuesday I sat down with our statements and understood that Ray Donnelly, the electrician, and Margaret Donnelly, the math teacher, were, very quietly, millionaires. We never spent it like it. We never told a living soul. We just felt, for the first time in our lives, safe. Ray died 10 months ago. He was out in the garage, the one he had wired up like a small palace, working on a little lamp for our granddaughter, and he had a stroke, and by the time I found him it was over. 41 years, and then a Tuesday afternoon and a silent garage and a lamp that never did get finished. I will not pretend I handled it well, because I did not. For weeks I could not sleep in our bed. I sat at the kitchen table at 3 a.m. with his coffee cup in my hands, the one I could not bring myself to wash. The grief was a fog so thick I could barely see my own hands in front of me. And that, I have come to understand, is exactly when the trouble found me. Because grief makes you slow. It makes you trusting. It makes you reach for whoever offers to carry the weight, even when the hand reaching back is reaching for your wallet. My son Greg started coming around more after his father died. At first I was grateful. He brought his wife, Whitney, and their 2 children, and the house felt a little less empty. He started asking how I was managing. He started asking so gently about the bills, about the house, about whether all of it was getting to be too much for me out there alone. "We just worry about you, Mom," he would say, and I, in my fog, believed that the worry was about me. It was not about me. It never had been. But I would not understand that for a while yet. What I did not know, sitting in my grief, letting my son pour my coffee and pat my hand, was that Greg had already been to see a lawyer. And what he had asked that lawyer was not how to help his grieving mother, it was how to take control of everything she owned before she ever knew it was gone. I had a daughter too. I should tell you about Dana, because she matters at the end. But Dana lived 2,000 miles away, and we had drifted, the way families sometimes do, and over the years Greg had quietly made sure the drift stayed wide. So in those first months it was just Greg, and Whitney, and me, and my fog, and the pen they were already so patiently getting ready to put into my hand. There came a night, about 2 months after the funeral, when the fog lifted just enough for me to do something I had not done in a long while. I sat down at the kitchen table and I took out a yellow legal pad and I started to add things up. Not money I had. Money I had given. I do not know what made me do it that night. Maybe it was the way Greg had asked, that very afternoon, whether I had thought about simplifying things. Maybe it was Whitney's eyes which moved around my living room like she was pricing the furniture. Something in me, the old teacher, the woman who always checked her work, woke up and said, "Margaret, look at the numbers." So I did. I started with the house, not mine. Theirs when Greg and Whitney bought their place. 11 years ago they were short on the down payment, and Ray and I covered it. $35,000. We called it a gift so that no one would have to feel the weight of a loan. $35,000. I wrote it down. Then, the business. Greg always had a new idea. The one that cost the most was the restaurant, a sandwich shop he was certain would grow into a franchise. It did not. When it folded, he came to us drowning in debt, and we pulled him out. $19,500 to make the creditors go away. $19,500. I wrote it down. Then the wedding. Whitney wanted a beautiful wedding, and Greg's own savings were, as always, somewhere else, so we paid for it. $13,800 for one afternoon. I had not minded at the time. You do not mind when it is for your child. $13,800. I wrote it down. Then the cars. There was an SUV they could not quite afford, and Ray co-signed it, and when the payments became a problem, we simply took them over. $9,200 before it was through. I wrote it down. Then the smaller things, year after year, that never felt like much on their own. A credit card that needed paying off before the interest swallowed them whole. A furnace. A vacation they could not otherwise have taken. $6,400, scattered across a decade like seeds. I wrote it down. And then the grandchildren, who I loved and would have given anything to. Braces, a summer camp, a registration fee here, a school trip there, $4,200. For them, I did not mind it for 1 single second. But I wrote it down. Then I added the column. I have added a great many columns in my life. My hand did not even slow. $87,400. I sat and looked at that number under the kitchen light. $87,400 given to one son and his wife over 11 years. Freely, lovingly, never once asked after. And I want to be careful here, because I do not want you to misunderstand me. The money did not hurt. I had the money. That was never the wound. Ray and I had more than enough, and giving it to our children was one of the quiet joys of having worked so hard for so long. If Greg had loved me, I would have written him a check for 10 times that sum and slept like a baby. No, what that column showed me was something else, and it was the something else that broke my heart. Because I am a teacher, and a teacher's whole life is built on a single idea. The idea that if you give a child enough, patiently, over enough years, it adds up to something. Knowledge, character, love. I had believed that about my own son the way I believed it about every student who ever sat in room 214. Give enough, and it adds up. So I did the other column, the one with no dollars in it. I tried to count the times since his father died that Greg had called me simply to ask how I was. Not how the house was, not how my money was, how I was. How my heart was holding up, alone in that house at 3 a.m. I sat there with my pencil ready, the way I had sat ready for 38 years to mark a correct answer. And the column stayed empty. There was nothing to write, not one entry. That was the arithmetic that undid me. $87,400 in one column and a zero in the other. I had spent 11 years pouring myself into a boy, certain it was adding up to a son who loved me, and the truth was sitting right there on the legal pad in my own neat handwriting. It had added up to nothing. He had taken every deposit and kept no account. I thought about the things Ray and I had gone without, not because we had to, but out of the habit of 40 years of carefulness. While we filled our son's emergencies, the trips we kept putting off, the good chair for Ray's bad back that he never let me buy him, and I thought about how, even now with my husband barely cold in the ground, my boy was sitting across from me asking me to simplify things. And I finally let myself ask the question I had been too foggy and too frightened to ask. What, exactly, did Greg want simplified? I did not have the whole answer that night. But the teacher in me had woken all the way up, and she does not go back to sleep until the problem is solved. I turned the legal pad face down. I washed Ray's coffee cup at last and set it in the rack, and something about that felt like one door closing and another one opening. And then I did a thing I had not let myself do since the funeral. I walked out to Ray's garage, the one he had wired like a palace, and I turned on his good bright lights, and I sat down on his work stool among his tools and his coils of copper wire, and I thought about my husband, who could fix anything that carried a current, and who used to tell me that the most dangerous thing in any house is the wire everyone assumes is dead. Check it first, he always said. Never trust that it is off just because somebody told you it is. I had been treating my grief like a wire someone had promised me was safe. It was time to check it myself. The next morning, I did not call Greg back about simplifying. Instead, I did 2 small things that would, in time, take everything Greg had planned and turn it around in his own hand like a blade. First, I bought myself a new iPhone, a good one, and I sat at my kitchen table with the patience of a woman who once taught teenagers to factor polynomials, and I learned exactly how the recorder worked. And second, I looked up an old name, A boy who had sat in the third row of room 211420 5 years ago. A boy who had come to me failing and frightened, and who I had kept after school 3 days a week until the numbers finally clicked behind his eyes. The last I had heard, that boy had grown up to become a lawyer. An estate lawyer. His name was Tom Alvarez, and I was about to find out whether he still remembered Mrs. Donnelly. But before I tell you about Tom, I have to tell you what happened over the next 3 weeks, because that is when my son and his wife showed me exactly who they were, and they did it without ever once suspecting that the foolish, fading old woman across the table was listening to every word and saving it. It began on a Sunday. Greg and Whitney came for dinner, and after the children were settled in the den with a tablet, Greg got that careful look on his face and he said, "Mom, Whitney and I have been talking, and we think it's time we helped you get organized. You've got the house, the 2 rentals, your accounts, all this paperwork from Dad. It's a lot for one person. We think you should set up a family trust and give us power of attorney so we can handle the heavy lifting for you. Take the worry off your plate." I had my new phone on the kitchen counter behind me, recording. I made my voice soft and uncertain. "A trust," I said. "I don't know, honey. Your father always handled the papers with our lawyer." "Dad's gone, Mom," Greg said, and there was a flatness in it that I felt in my chest. "And no offense, but you've been forgetting things lately. The keys. That bill you paid twice. It's normal, it's your age, but it's exactly why you need us to step in now, before something goes really wrong." I had not paid any bill twice. I had misplaced my keys one afternoon, the way every human being who has ever lived has misplaced their keys. But I understood, sitting there, what they were doing. They were building a story. Brick by brick. The story of a mother who was slipping, who could not be trusted with her own affairs, who needed a son to take the wheel. I had read about this. I had even once sat with a fellow teacher whose own children had tried it. They were laying the foundation to have me declared unable to manage my life so they could manage it for me. Manage it right into their pockets. "Well," I said slowly, "maybe you're right. Maybe I am getting forgetful." Whitney smiled. It was the smile of someone who thinks the deal is closing. "We just love you, Margaret," she said. "We want you taken care of." That evening I learned how much they loved me, because they told each other in my own kitchen, while I was supposed to be resting in the other room. I had left my phone on the counter, recording, and I sat in the dark hallway and I listened. I will not repeat all of it. Some of it I have decided to keep, because a person should be allowed to forget the very worst things said about them by their own child. But I will tell you the shape of it. I heard Greg say the duplexes alone were worth a good amount, and that once they had the power of attorney they could sell both of them and stop pretending Mom can keep track of tenants. I heard Whitney say there was a place out on the county road, a facility, a nice one, that would handle everything, and that the sooner they moved me there, the simpler it would all be. I heard Greg laugh, a small laugh, and say, "She'll sign whatever I put in front of her. She's not all there since Dad died. Honestly, it's the kindest thing. Getting it done now while she's too out of it to make a fuss. She is not all there. It is the kindest thing." I sat in my dark hallway, 71 years old, in the house where I had raised that boy, and I listened to my son explain to his wife that the kindest thing he could do for his grieving mother was to declare her senile, sell her home out from under her, lock her in a facility, and take her money while she was too broken to notice. And the strangest thing happened. I did not cry. The fog, which had wrapped me for 10 months, lifted all the way, and it did not come back. In its place was something clear and cold and very, very steady. The teacher, fully awake now with a problem in front of her and all the time in the world to solve it. 2 days later, Greg brought the doctor. He called him an old friend. "Just a friendly visit," he said. Nothing formal. The man sat in my living room with a cup of coffee and asked me easy questions in a slow, loud voice. What year was it? Who was the president? Could I count backward from 100 by sevens? I answered every one. I could have answered them in my sleep. I taught children to count backward by sevens for 38 years, but I watched the doctor write things down anyway. I watched Greg lean over and murmur to him. And I understood. The answers did not matter. The paper mattered. Greg was not looking for the truth about my mind. He was shopping for a signature that said what he needed it to say. So I gave them a little gift. I let one answer slip, just one. He asked me the date, and I paused, and I frowned, and I said the wrong month. Then I laughed a small, embarrassed laugh and corrected myself. It was nothing. Anyone might do it. But I watched the doctor underline something. I watched Greg's face. And I saw it. Satisfaction. He thought he had what he came for. He did not know I had handed it to him on purpose. He did not know my phone was on the side table the whole time, recording. A doctor who writes down what a son tells him to write is not proof of a failing mind. He is proof of something else. And now I had him too. There was the matter of the keys as well. I had set my keys on the wrong hook one afternoon. That was all. I found them in 10 minutes. But Greg told that story for weeks. He told Whitney. He told the neighbor. He told me, gently as evidence. You're forgetting things, Mom, the keys, remember? He built a whole case out of a set of car keys on the wrong hook. I let him. I nodded. I said maybe he was right. And every time he told that little story, I thought the same thing. A younger me would have argued. A younger me would have defended herself, gotten upset, demanded he stop. But I was not a younger me anymore. I was a woman with a problem to solve and a phone in her pocket. Arguing would only have warned him. So I let my son build his case, brick by foolish brick, and quietly I built mine. The next week, the story building continued. Greg happened to mention to my neighbor that I had been confused lately. He asked me twice in front of Whitney what day it was and made a great show of gentle concern when I answered correctly anyway. He brought up a doctor, an old friend of his, who could just take a look at me, and I understood that he was shopping for a piece of paper. A note from some agreeable physician that would say Margaret Donnelly was not competent. He even had a date in mind now, a meeting at his lawyer's office where, he said, we'll just get the paperwork signed and stop worrying about all this. Through every bit of it, I played my part. I let my hand shake. I let my voice wander. I thanked them for caring about a silly old woman. And I recorded all of it. Every condescending word, every false concern, every plan they laid in front of me, believing I could not understand it. They thought I was an empty house. They did not know the wire was live. And then, on a Thursday morning, with 3 weeks of recordings safe in my pocket, I picked up my new phone and I dialed a number I had found for a law office downtown. And I asked the young woman who answered if I might possibly speak with Mr. Alvarez. I told her my name was Margaret Donnelly and that I had been his teacher a long time ago. There was a pause. Then I heard her put me on hold. And then a man's voice came on the line. A grown man's voice. But underneath it I could hear the boy from the third row, and the boy was not gone at all. Mrs. Donnelly? He said. Is this really Mrs. Donnelly? Room 214? Hello, Toms, I said. I'm afraid I need some help. And I didn't know who else in this world I could trust. Mrs. Donnelly, he said, and his voice had gone thick. You kept me in that classroom every day after school for a whole year when everybody else had given up on me. I'd have flunked out and gone straight to nothing if you hadn't. You tell me what you need. Whatever it is, whatever it takes. I had not let myself cry through any of it, not the recordings, not the cruelty, not the long nights. But I cried then. Because for 10 months I had given and gotten nothing back, and here, on the telephone, was a boy I had given to 25 years ago, and it had added up after all. It had added up in him. Just not in my own son. I drove to Tom's office that afternoon. He was a grown man now, gray at the temples with a kind face and a firm handshake and a whole wall of diplomas, and he came around his desk to hug me before he would let me sit down. I told him everything. The fog. The funeral. The simplifying. The recordings in my pocket. The meeting Greg had set at his lawyer's office, and I told him the thing nobody else in the world knew, the thing that made all of it make sense. I told him exactly how much Ray and I had quietly saved over 38 years, and I watched a former third-row student's eyes go wide. "Mrs. Donnelly," he said softly. "Greg has no idea, does he? He's looking at the house and the 2 duplexes and thinking that's the whole pie. He thinks teachers don't have money," I said. "He has always thought that." Tom sat back, and the kind face turned serious, the way I imagine it turns serious in a courtroom. "All right," he said. "Let me explain to you exactly where you stand, because it is much, much stronger than you think, and once you understand it, we are going to be very patient and very quiet, and we are going to let your son walk all the way to the edge before he finds out there is no floor." "Patient and quiet," I said. "Tom's, you are speaking my language." He laid it out for me plainly. "What Greg is attempting," he said, "is called a conservatorship, sometimes a guardianship. He wants a court to declare that you cannot manage your own affairs, so that he can be appointed to manage them for you. To get it, he has to prove you are incompetent. That is the whole game. Everything else, the trust, the power of attorney, the friendly doctor, the story he's telling your neighbors, all of it is just him building a case that your mind is going." He leaned forward. "So here is the first thing we do. We prove, beyond any possible doubt, that your mind is perfectly sound. Not with a friendly doctor, with a real one. A board-certified geriatric specialist who will give you a full cognitive evaluation and put her findings in writing. The moment we have that, his entire case collapses. You cannot conserve a competent adult. It is the floor he doesn't know is missing." "And the recordings?" I asked. "The recordings," Tom said, and a slow, careful smile crossed his face, "are something else entirely. You were a party to every one of those conversations. They happened in your own home, and you were in the room. That makes them yours to keep and yours to use. And what they prove, Mrs. Donnelly, is not a worried family trying to help. They prove 2 adults conspiring to have a competent woman falsely declared incompetent in order to seize and sell her property and confine her against her will. That is not a misunderstanding. That is attempted financial exploitation of an elder, and depending on how far it went, it is a crime. Your son recorded his own confession in your kitchen, and he handed it to you, because he was so sure you were too far gone to be holding the phone. I thought about Ray and the live wire, and I almost laughed. "What's the third thing?" I asked. "The third thing," Tom said, "is that we make sure that no matter what happens, Greg never gets a dollar he tried to take. Right now, if something happened to you, your estate would pass partly to him. I want to change that, with your blessing, before the meeting. Quietly, we restructure everything. We move your assets where his hands can never reach them, we rewrite your will, and we make absolutely certain that the man who tried to declare his mother insane to get her money inherits exactly nothing." He paused. "I have to ask you to be sure about that, Mrs. Donnelly. He is still your son." I sat with that for a moment, in that office, with a former student waiting kindly for my answer, and I thought about a boy who laughed in my kitchen and called it the kindest thing. "Tom's," I said. "I taught for 38 years that you do not get the grade you didn't earn. Greg earned a 0. We are simply going to record it honestly." What followed were the strangest and, in their own way, most alive weeks I had known since Ray died. By day I was the fading, grieving mother my son needed me to be. I let him visit. I let him ask me what day it was. I let him believe the meeting at his lawyer's office was going to be the easy little formality he had planned. And by night, and in quiet afternoons in an office downtown, I was someone else entirely. I was the woman who checks the wire. Tom's first task was the evaluation, and he did not waste a day. He sent me to a geriatric specialist named Dr. Aisha Bello, a careful, unhurried woman who spent the better part of 3 hours with me. She tested my memory, my reasoning, my judgment. She had me work through problems, recall lists, explain my own finances, walk her through my decisions. I will admit, the old teacher in me enjoyed it more than I should say. When she was done, she set down her clipboard and looked at me over her glasses. "Mrs. Donnelly," she said, "I have to ask, why exactly are you here? Your cognition is excellent. Better than excellent, frankly, for any age. Your memory, your reasoning, your judgment, all of it is intact and sharp. If someone has suggested you are impaired, they are mistaken, and I will say so in writing, in plain language, as many times as anyone needs to hear it. Someone has suggested it," I said. "Please do put it in writing. Plain language. I have a feeling I'm going to need it." She did. A formal signed evaluation, dated, on letterhead, stating that Margaret Donnelly was of entirely sound mind and fully capable of managing her own affairs. Tom put it in a folder, and the folder went into his desk, and we had our floor that Greg did not know was missing. Then came the quiet part Tom had warned me would feel strange. We restructured everything. Over 2 careful weeks, with Tom guiding me through every page, I moved the bulk of my assets into an arrangement Greg could not touch, could not borrow against, could not sell, and could not inherit. I rewrote my will from top to bottom. And I made 2 decisions that I want to tell you about, because they are the part of this whole story I am proudest of. The first was my daughter. The second was my students. I had not spoken to Dana, really spoken to her, in nearly 3 years. We had drifted, and I had let us, and I had quietly blamed her for the distance the way wounded mothers do. But sitting in Tom's office, deciding where my life's work should go, I understood something. Dana had never once in her whole life asked me for money. Not for a wedding, not for a house, not for a business that failed. Greg had asked for everything. Dana had asked for nothing. And the simple, terrible truth was that I had mistaken the child who took from me for the child who loved me, and ignored the one who simply stayed far away and never put out her hand. So one evening, before I changed a single word of my will, I picked up my new phone, and I called my daughter. Just to talk. Not about money, not about Greg. Just to hear her voice and say I missed her. It was awkward at first, the way it is when too much time has passed, but somewhere in the second hour the awkwardness fell away, and we were just a mother and a daughter again, 2 women who had loved each other all along and let a silence grow too wide. I did not tell her that night about any of it. I only told her I loved her, and that I was sorry it had been so long. When we hung up, I sat in the quiet for a while, and I felt, for the first time in 10 months, that I was not entirely alone in the world. The second decision was room 214. I told Tom I wanted to set up a fund, a scholarship in Ray's name and mine at Lincoln High, for the students who struggle with math, the third-row kids that everyone has given up on, so that there would always be a little money to keep the door open and the lights on after the bell. Tom wrote it into the plan. And I will tell you, choosing to give my life savings to a room full of kids I will never meet, instead of to the son who tried to take it, was the first thing in a long, long time that made me feel like myself. Tom had taught me one more thing, early on, and it turned out to matter. Never keep the only copy, he said. Evidence that lives in one place can disappear. So, I made copies. The recordings went onto a small drive, and the drive went to Connie, sealed in an envelope. to keep in her own house. A second copy went to Tom's office. The original stayed with me. 3 places. 3 keys to the same door. If anything ever happens to your phone, Tom said, or to you, this still exists. That is the point. I had spent my whole life making sure none of the power leaked out of our house. Now I made sure none of the truth could leak out, either, through all of it. I kept playing my part. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Greg would come by, and I would let my voice wander, and I would thank him for worrying about his silly old mother. The whole time I would be thinking of the folder in Tom's desk and the drive in Connie's drawer. Once, he caught me at the kitchen table with a pencil and a long column of figures, and his eyes narrowed. "What's all that, Mom?" My heart jumped. But I only smiled and slid the pad away and said, "Oh, just adding up my little bills, dear. You know how I lose track." He relaxed. He believed it. He always believed whatever made me smaller. I had not been adding up bills at all. But he would not learn that until Friday. But I have to be honest with you, because honesty is the only thing worth offering. There was a stretch in the middle of all this where I nearly lost everything, and it happened through pure carelessness and bad luck. Greg called one evening and told me in his patient voice that he was moving the meeting up. The signing at his lawyer's office was no longer 3 weeks away. It was now that Friday. Just 9 days off. "No sense dragging it out, Mom," he said. "The sooner we get this handled, the sooner you can stop worrying." I understood at once what the new urgency meant. Either he sensed something, or he simply wanted me locked in before I could get any worse. Either way, my time had just been cut in half, and Dr. Bellow's evaluation was not yet finished, and the will was not yet signed. I called Tom in a near panic, and that calm former student of mine simply said, "Then we move faster. Leave it to me." And we did. But 2 days later, the second piece of luck nearly undid us. Whitney came by the house unannounced, with a casserole and a too bright smile, and she walked into my kitchen while I was on the phone with Tom's office, confirming an appointment. I did not hear her come in. I had Tom's business card sitting right there on the counter, in plain sight, beside my keys. When I turned and saw her standing in the doorway, my heart stopped, because her eyes had gone straight to that card and then to me, and there was a sharpness in her face I had not seen before. "Who's Tom's Alvarez?" she asked lightly, too lightly, picking up the card before I could move. "Attorney at law." "Margaret, are you talking to a lawyer?" Everything hung on the next 10 seconds. If she carried that card home to Greg, the whole quiet game was over, the surprise gone, and I would be sitting across from a son who knew I was armed. So I did the only thing I could. I let my face go soft and confused, and I let my hand flutter to my chest, and I made my voice small and a little frightened. "Oh," I said. "Oh, that nice young man. He came to the door, dear, selling, oh, what was it? Insurance for the house, I think. Or was it the funeral kind? I get them mixed up. He left his card. I keep meaning to throw it out. I let my eyes go a little watery. Do you think I should call him back? I can't remember if I was supposed to." I watched Whitney decide. I watched her want to believe it, because believing it confirmed everything she already thought about me, and people will always believe the thing that proves them right. The sharpness drained out of her face, and something like satisfaction took its place. "No, Margaret," she said gently, setting the card back down. "Don't you worry about it. We'll handle all that for you soon. Just throw it out." And she patted my hand, and she put her casserole in the refrigerator, and she left. The moment her car was gone, I sat down hard in Ray's chair and shook for a good long while. It had been that close. A business card and an unlocked door, and it would all have come apart. That night I told Tom, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Mrs. Donnelly, the fact that she could look at you, holding the very evidence of your own competence in her hand, and still choose to believe you were too far gone to dial a phone, tells me everything I need to know about what kind of people we are dealing with. Their whole plan rests on you being helpless. Let's let them keep believing it. Just until Friday. The day before the meeting, my old friend Connie came for tea. Connie taught English down the hall from room 214 for 30 years, and she is the only person besides Tom who knew the whole of it. She listened to all of it, the recordings, the racing to finish, the close call with Whitney, and when I was done she set down her cup and looked at me a long time. "Margaret," she said, "can I tell you the thing I've watched you not see for 40 years? "You're going to anyway," I said. And she smiled. "You spent your whole life believing the only thing you had to offer anybody was what you could give them," she said. "Your time, after the bell, your patience, your money, your help, your endless second chances, and it made you the finest teacher I ever knew. But it also made you an easy mark for a son like Greg, because you never once believed you were worth something simply as yourself. An upright woman with a sound mind and a good name, who deserves respect for nothing more than being who she is." She reached over and took my hand the way Tom had. "So tomorrow, when you walk into that room, I don't just want you to win, Margaret. I want you to walk out of there finally knowing that you were never the helpless one. Not for a single day. They needed you to forget who you were so they could take what was yours. Don't you dare give them that, on top of everything else." I have thought about Connie's words many times since. She saw the thing I had spent a lifetime refusing to see. I had built my whole sense of worth on what I handed to other people, and Greg had counted on exactly that. Connie made sure that whatever happened the next day, I would walk in as myself and walk out as myself with my own two eyes clear. That night, I did not sleep much, but it was not from fear. It was the way you do not sleep the night before a final exam you have studied your whole life for. Everything was in place. Doctor, Bellows evaluation, signed and dated. 3 weeks of recordings, safe in 2 places. A new will, executed and witnessed, that left my son nothing and my daughter and my students everything. And a former third-row boy, grown into a fine attorney, who would be sitting 2 floors below the meeting, waiting for one phone call. Greg thought Friday was the day he would finally take everything. He had no idea it was the day he would lose it. I dressed carefully that morning, my good navy suit, the one I used to wear to graduations. I fixed my hair. I put Dr. Bellows' folder and a small printed page in my purse beside my phone, and I drove myself downtown, the same downtown where Tom's office sat 2 floors below the office Greg had chosen. I had a part to play one last time, and I meant to play it all the way to the final line. The lawyer Greg had hired had a big corner office with a long table, and they were already there when I arrived. Greg in a suit I had never seen, sitting straight and pleased with himself. Whitney beside him, in pearls, with that closing the deal smile. And the lawyer, a smooth gray man named Dale Renner, who rose and shook my hand and called me Mrs. Donnelly in the slow, careful voice people use for the very old and the very simple. "Now, Mrs. Donnelly," Renner began, sliding a thick stack of papers across the table toward me, "your son has explained the situation, and these documents are just going to make everything easier for you. A trust and a power of attorney, so Greg can take care of all the difficult things. There's no need to read every word. I'll walk you through it. We just need your signature here, and here, and here." I picked up the pen. I let my hand tremble the way I had practiced. And that was the moment my son leaned over to the lawyer and lowered his voice and said the words I will remember for the rest of my life. "Don't worry about her. She doesn't know what she's signing." But I did. I set the pen down gently, and I took off my reading glasses, and I folded my hands on top of that thick stack of papers, and I let the trembling stop. I sat up straight, the way I sat for 38 years at the front of room 214, and I looked at my son with 2 perfectly clear eyes, and I watched the smile begin to falter on his face, because some animal part of him knew, in that instant, that something was wrong. "Greg," I said, in a voice that did not shake at all. "Before I sign anything, I'd like to make a phone call. It will only take a moment." And before anyone could answer, I took out my phone, and I pressed one button, and I said, "Tom's, we're ready. Come on up." The room went very still. Renner's smooth face creased with the first flicker of doubt. "Mrs. Donnelly," he said carefully. "Who is that?" "That," I said, "is my attorney." The door opened a minute later and Tom walked in his good gray suit, carrying his own folder, and he set it on the table and pulled out a chair beside mine and said, pleasantly, "Good morning, everyone, Tom's Alvarez. I represent Mrs. Donnelly. I think this meeting is about to go a little differently than planned. I have never in my life seen the color drain from a person's face the way it drained from my son's." "Mom," he said. "Mom, what is this? What are you doing?" "I'm checking the wire, Greg," I said quietly. "Your father always told me to. I should have started a long time ago." Tom spoke then, and his voice was even and unhurried, the voice of a man who has read the last page of the book. "I'll keep this simple," he said, "because the facts are simple. Mr. Renner, I assume your client told you that your client's mother is cognitively impaired and unable to manage her own affairs. That is the basis for these documents, and for the conservatorship I expect was coming next, so I want to make sure everyone in this room has seen this." He slid Dr. Bellow's evaluation across the table. "A full cognitive evaluation performed last week by a board-certified geriatric specialist. Her conclusion, in writing, in plain language, is that Mrs. Donnelly is of entirely sound mind and fully competent to manage her own affairs. There is no impairment. There never was. Which means there is no legal basis whatsoever for a power of attorney she does not want, a trust she did not ask for, or a conservatorship. The premise of this entire meeting is false." Renner picked up the evaluation and read it, and I watched a careful lawyer begin to understand that he had been handed a very dirty deal by a client who had lied to him. "There's more," Tom said. "And I'd ask everyone to listen carefully, because Mr. and Mrs. Donnelly are going to want to choose their next words with great care." He turned to Greg and Whitney. "Over the past several weeks, Mrs. Donnelly was present for a number of conversations in her own home. She was a party to every one of them, which makes them lawfully hers. In those conversations, the two of you discussed having a competent woman falsely declared incompetent. You discussed selling her 2 rental properties the moment you obtained authority. You discussed moving her into a facility against her wishes. And one of you described the entire plan as, and I am quoting, the kindest thing, to be done quickly while she was, quote, too out of it to make a fuss." He let it sit. "Those recordings exist. They are preserved in more than one place. And what they describe is not a family trying to help. It is a coordinated attempt to defraud an elder of her property and her liberty. That has a name in this state, and it is a crime." Whitney made a small sound. Greg had gone gray as ash. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked. "Mom, please, we thought we were helping. We thought you needed, we never meant, Mom. You can't, this would ruin us." And here is the moment I had wondered about. In all those long nights. Whether, when it came, I would want to crow. To wound him the way he had wounded me. But sitting there looking at my boy with the color gone from his face, I felt none of that. I felt a deep and final sadness, and beneath it, holding me up, something I had never had in my whole life of giving. I felt my own worth. Not as the woman who gives, just as the woman who is. "Greg," I said, "look at me. For once in your life, look at your mother and not at the papers." He did. "You sat in my kitchen, the kitchen where I raised you, and you told your wife that the kindest thing you could do for me was to call me crazy, sell my home, lock me away, and take everything your father and I built in 40 years of honest work. You were so certain I was nothing anymore that you said it out loud while I was in the next room. That is what you decided I was worth." I took a breath. "I taught school for 38 years, Greg. I never once gave a child a grade he did not earn. And I am not, going to start with you." Tom laid the last folder on the table. "Here is where things stand," he said. "Mrs. Donnelly has options, and the choice of how this ends belongs entirely to her, as it always did. She is within her rights to refer these recordings and this attempted exploitation to the district attorney's office, which could result in criminal charges against both of you. She is also filing a complaint with the state bar regarding the conduct that brought us all to this table." Renner flinched at that, and she has already, as is entirely her right, restructured her estate. Effective immediately, she has executed a new will and moved her assets beyond the reach of either of you. You should understand clearly there is nothing here left for you to take, and there will be nothing for you to inherit. Whatever you imagined was coming to you is gone. Not because anyone took it from you, because you tried to take it from her. I watched that land on my son. The duplexes, the house, the savings he thought he understood, and the far larger thing he never even knew existed. All of it gone, not seized, just simply, finally out of his reach forever. And I watched him understand, too late, that he had gambled his mother's love and his entire inheritance on the bet that she was too broken to count, and that the bet had failed. "Mom," Whitney started, and even now I could hear the calculation under it. "Surely we don't have to involve the police. We're family. Think about the children." "I am thinking about the children," I said, and I looked at her steadily, and the last of my fear left me for good. "I'm thinking about what they would learn, growing up, if they saw that you could do this to a grandmother and face nothing for it. So here is what is going to happen, and Tom's has put it in writing. I am not going to send their father to prison, because they are children, and they should not have to visit him behind glass for the rest of their childhood. That mercy is for them. It is not for you, and it is not for Greg." I set the small printed page on the table. "You will both sign a sworn statement admitting exactly what you planned, which I will keep. If either of you ever comes near me, my home, my money, or my good name again, it goes straight to the district attorney that same afternoon. You will not be welcome in my house. And the support, all of it, every check, every bailout, every emergency, ended the day you sat in my kitchen and called declaring me insane, the kindest thing. The account is closed." They signed. 2 days later, in Tom's office, in front of witnesses and a notary, with their real names. Renner, the lawyer, withdrew from representing them within the hour and, I am told, spent some uncomfortable weeks of his own once the bar complaint was filed. The conservatorship never happened. It could not. You cannot conserve a competent woman, and I had the paper, signed and dated, to prove it as many times as anyone ever needed to hear it. As for Greg, I heard things, the way you do in a small town. I heard the sworn statement he signed sat heavy on him. I heard he and Whitney had to sell the SUV, and then the house, the one whose down payment I had quietly paid 11 years before. I heard the friendly doctor stopped returning Greg's calls the moment the bar started asking questions. I did not take pleasure in any of it. I want you to believe that. A mother does not enjoy watching her son reap what he sowed. But I did not stop it. Either there is a difference between cruelty and consequence, and I had finally learned, at 71, to leave the second one alone. I did not feel like celebrating. I want to be truthful with you all the way to the end. The night it was finished, I came home to a quiet house, and I sat at the kitchen table where I had raised that boy, and I cried for a long while. Not for the money. The money was safe, and it was going where it should. I cried for my son. For the little boy who once needed help with his arithmetic, who I kept after the bell just like all the others, who grew into a man who looked at his grieving mother and saw only an account to be drained. I let myself grieve that, finally, the way I had grieved Ray, and when I was done I felt lighter than I had in a year. Because grief, real grief, is what you feel when you finally stop pretending. And I was done pretending. In the weeks that followed, I did the things I had spent a lifetime putting off. I took the trip Ray and I never took. I bought the good chair, in his memory, and I put it by the window where the morning light comes in. I started having tea with Connie every Wednesday, and we laugh more than 2 retired school teachers have any right to. And I signed the last papers on the scholarship the Margaret and Ray Donnelly Fund at Lincoln High for the third-row kids that everyone gives up on, so that the door to room 214 stays open and the lights stay on long after the bell. The principal cried when I told her. I did a little too, and then, on a Sunday morning, my daughter came home. Dana flew across the country to see me, the first time in 3 years, and when I finally told her the whole story, all of it, the recordings and the meeting and her brother's gray face, she held me for a long time, and she wept. "Mom," she said, "I should have called more. I let him keep us apart. I'm so sorry I wasn't there." And I told her the truth. "You never put out your hand, Dana, not once in your whole life. I had it backwards all these years. I chased the child who took from me and forgot the one who only ever loved me. That was my mistake to fix, not yours. And I'm fixing it now." She stayed 2 weeks. We sat on the back step with our coffee Maxwell House the way Ray and I used to, and we talked until late. And she taught me to use the video calling on my new phone so we would never let 3 years pass again. She does not want the money. She has told me so plainly more than once, which is of course exactly why she is getting it. This morning I woke up early, the way I always have. 38 years of school bells you cannot unlearn. I made my coffee and carried it out to the back step Ray and I shared for 41 years, and I sat and watched the sun come up over the yard. The grass was wet. A wren was fussing in the hedge. And for the first time in a very long time, I was not waiting for a phone to ring with my son's next emergency, and I was not bracing for the next gentle question about whether things were getting to be too much for me. I was just a woman, in her own home, on a quiet morning that belonged entirely to her. I thought about Ray, out in his garage, and the thing he always told me. Check it first. Never trust that the wire is dead just because somebody told you it was. He spent 40 years making sure the power in our house never hurt anybody. In the end, it was the lesson he left me that kept me safe. I lifted my coffee a little, toward the morning, toward him, toward the garage with the lamp that never got finished. "I checked it, Ray," I said. "The wire was live the whole time. Just like you always said." The wren went quiet. The sun came up. And I drank my coffee in the house that was, and is, and will remain entirely my own. My name is Margaret Donnelly. I am 71 years old. I taught mathematics for 38 years, and the one thing I tried to teach every single child who ever sat in front of me was this: always check your work, because the numbers do not lie, even when the people do. I spent 11 years letting my own account go unbalanced, because I was so afraid that asking for the respect I had earned would cost me the love I thought I had. It turned out that love was never really there to lose. What was there all along was a clear mind, a careful record, a good name worth protecting. And a boy from the third row who grew up and remembered. My son leaned over and told a stranger I did not know what I was signing. He was wrong about that, the way he was wrong about everything that mattered. I knew exactly what I was signing. I have always known exactly what I was signing. If you have ever been treated like a sum that no longer adds up by the very people you gave everything to, I hope you will remember what one old math teacher learned almost too late, and then thank God just in time. Check your work, read every line, and never ever let anyone convince you that you do not know your own name. The sun is up, my coffee is warm, and the house is quiet, the good kind of quiet, the kind that is finally completely mine.